The gym froze. The barbell bent. And the man they called old lifted what none of them dared to touch. The bar bent first. A groan from the steel, low and primal, echoed across the gym before his legs even moved. The squat rack creaked, the plates bowed. Then motion. Deliberate. Unearthly. Controlled. Arnold's boots pressed into the rubber flooring, heels locked in. His grip, bare, chalkless, tightened around the narrow bar. The room, moments ago filled with clanks and hype music, had silenced itself, like it knew this wasn't a lift, it was a reckoning. He pulled. The plates rose in unison, no jerk, no bounce. His spine straight as a scaffolding, arms locked like pistons forged in war. Each vertebra carried decades. Each breath measured a lifetime. The chain above the platform trembled slightly, as though reacting to something ancient being summoned. 1 rep. He held it for a second, longer than needed, not for show but for memory. Then lowered it, slow as a bow, until the bar touched the platform with a finality that sounded less like weight being dropped and more like a chapter closing. No applause. No hype shouts. Just all. Near the leg press machine, a guy in a tank top slowly lowered his phone without hitting record. Another trainer leaned against the cable tower, eyes wide, posture frozen. A girl tying her shoes stopped mid-lace, caught in the weight of the silence. Arnold stepped back. No fist pump. No glance around. He exhaled, quiet through his nose, as if he just set down something heavier than metal. His hoodie, dark gray, soaked in effort, frayed at the collar, clung to his shoulders like a banner from another time. He didn't adjust it. He didn't have to. In the far corner, a 17-year-old kid, Marcus, stood beside the dumbbell rack, still gripping a 20-pound weight he hadn't lifted yet. His eyes didn't blink. He didn't look at the bar, or the plates, or the platform. He looked at the man who had just moved them. And something changed in his spine. Across the gym, a figure shifted, arms crossed, tight jaw, posture defensive. Ryan. A trainer. Younger. Sharper. Louder. Still trying to recover the room with his smirk. He wouldn't get the chance. Because in that moment, before anyone had uttered a word, before a single insult or challenge or name had even been said, the story had already begun unraveling. Not with confrontation, but with conviction. Not with fire, but with silence. 15 minutes earlier, no one had even noticed the old man walking in. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. 15 minutes earlier, the gym was alive with noise. Ropes slapped rubber. Weights clanged like machines grinding in rhythm. Trainers barked corrections. Music pulsed through overhead speakers, too loud to be ignored. Another ordinary morning. Then the door clicked. No one turned. A man stepped in, hood up, shoulders wide, gait steady but weighted. His sneakers were faded, soles peeling. His hoodie hung loose, the sleeves tugged down, hands tucked inside. A few gym-goers glanced over, instinctively scanning the figure. Gray at the temples. Wrinkles at the edges. A limp barely visible. Verdict delivered in seconds, another retiree trying to stay active. Most looked away. Ryan didn't. He leaned against the preacher curl bench, towel around his neck, water bottle perched on a ledge behind him like a throne. His followers, 3 or 4 clients in compression shirts, circled him like satellites. He was mid-rant. Something about hustle. Something about killing comfort zones. Then he saw the man. Arnold moved past the treadmills without a glance at anyone. His breathing was quiet. Unrushed. He didn't strut. He didn't stretch theatrically. He walked like he belonged in places that no longer needed to prove themselves. Ryan's grin formed before the words did. Natural. Effortless. Like a reflex. Careful, he said, voice just loud enough to reach the ears that mattered. Someone help Grandpa find the pickleball court. A couple chuckles. Arnold didn't look. He kept walking, passing the rowing machines. Ryan's grin widened, like a blade unsheathed. Hope you signed the liability waiver, sir. The dumbbells tend to fight back. More laughter now, sharper, pointed. One of his clients actually clapped. Another nudged a friend. A smirk passed like a virus from one corner of the gym to another. No one spoke up. No one stepped in. Arnold stopped briefly near the incline bench. Rolled his wrist. Adjusted the seam of his hoodie. Still no words. Ryan watched him closely. Something in the silence irritated him, like throwing a stone in water and seeing no ripple. He raised his voice. This is performance zone, Pops. Not assisted stretching. Unless you're lost? A louder burst. This time, the front desk attendant turned. Even the music seemed to lower itself a notch, unsure whether to stay in rhythm with the energy in the room. Arnold didn't reply. Just walked to the squat rack and stood before it, head slightly bowed, eyes on the bar. His presence alone shifted something. People noticed. A boy on the treadmill paused. A woman tying wraps looked up. Ryan's smile twitched. This wasn't how these things usually went. But he wasn't done. Not yet. The squat rack stood untouched. Arnold placed his hands gently on the steel bar, not to lift, not yet. Just contact. Just acknowledgement. His fingers curled around the knurling like greeting an old friend. No warm-up. No headphones. No mirror checking. Just presence. Ryan's voice cut through the air like a whip. Oh, come on, he said, louder now, walking toward the rack. You here to lift or just pray to it? The room chuckled, less genuine this time. Uneasy. But the momentum of mockery had already been set in motion. Ryan circled the rack slowly, like a wolf pacing around something it didn't quite understand. You do realize this isn't nostalgia hour, right? This is where real athletes train. Arnold didn't move. Ryan leaned in, his smirk pressing hard. Need help loading the bar? Or just want us to wheel in a walker for support? A louder laugh broke out near the dumbbell rack. A girl dropped her water bottle, snorted, then covered her mouth. Two guys by the cable machine elbowed each other. The moment had turned ugly, and nobody was stopping it. Except one. Marcus stood near the incline benches, holding a resistance band like it might snap if he pulled too hard. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't smiling. His eyes stayed fixed on the man in the hoodie. Something about the way Arnold stood, unmoving, unbothered, made the room feel off-kilter. Like everyone else was on fast-forward, and he was calmly holding time still. Ryan clapped his hands loud, performative. Hey, legend! He shouted, using the word like a joke. This ain't some comeback movie. This is real sweat. Real weight. You sure you didn't wander in from the physical therapy wing? Chuckles again. Arnold turned, finally. Slow. Measured. Just a slight pivot of his head. No expression on his face. No emotion in his brow. Just eyes, clear, quiet, and unblinking. He looked through Ryan, not at him. Not anger. Not pity. Just recognition. The kind of look that said, I've buried louder men than you in silence. Ryan faltered. Not visibly, not yet. But something in his stance shifted. Just slightly. Just enough. Arnold turned back to the rack. He adjusted the sleeve of his hoodie. Revealed nothing. Still said nothing. And still, somehow, the room began to quiet. The treadmill stopped. The cable machine paused mid-rep. Even the speaker system dropped a beat. It was as if the air around the squat rack had thickened, drawn everything into its orbit. No one knew what he was about to do, but everyone could feel it. Even Ryan. Especially Ryan. And for the first time in years, he didn't know how to finish a sentence. Arnold moved away from the squat rack. He didn't speak. He didn't acknowledge the laughter still echoing behind him. He walked slowly, each step like a pendulum swing, calm, deliberate, unbothered. At the dumbbell rack, he paused. The weights gleamed under fluorescent light, neatly stacked, untouched by ego. He reached for a pair of 60s. Not for spectacle. Not for statement. Just enough. His grip wrapped around the handles like memory finding muscle. He turned his back to the room. A single move. Intentional. Sharp. He wasn't performing for them. He wasn't posing for the mirror. No setup, no flex, no show. He simply stood there, shoulder-width stance, spine upright, elbows locked tight to his ribs. And he moved. Curl. Lower. Curl. Lower. Each rep was clean, symmetrical, and quiet. The iron didn't clang. His arms didn't shake. There was no breathless struggle, only rhythm. The kind built over decades. The kind you don't train for a crowd, you train into your bones. The gym was no longer laughing. Even the treadmills slowed to a crawl. A few gym-goers stopped pretending to stretch. Phones hovered, half-raised, unsure if they were capturing a viral moment or something that deserved silence. Ryan stood nearby, watching. Hands on hips. Jaw clenched. His voice pushed out with forced ease. "Form's nice," he said. "For someone who probably used to train in black and white." A chuckle somewhere in the back. It didn't land. Arnold didn't flinch. He finished the set, turned toward the rack, and placed the weights back with a soft click. Not slammed. Not dropped. Set. He straightened. Only then did he turn toward Ryan. His voice came low, too low for the speakers to drown out. Steady. Grounded. "I don't lift for cameras. I lift for memory." The words dropped like iron on the floor. Simple. Final. Ryan blinked. His smirk cracked not from offense, but from uncertainty. The kind you feel when the script you've used on everyone else stops working. When the target doesn't react. Doesn't flinch. Doesn't play along. Behind them, Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. That sentence, "I live for memory," hung in the air like smoke. He didn't understand all of it. Not yet. But it echoed in places no coach had ever reached. He looked at the dumbbells in his own hands. Then back at Arnold. Not one wasted movement. Not one wasted word. Arnold adjusted the cuff of his hoodie, then stepped past Ryan without a second glance. The barbs had stopped. The smirks were fewer. And somewhere in that gym, buried beneath the iron and sweat and ego, a tide had shifted. It just hadn't hit shore yet. The heavy bag swayed gently in the corner, untouched. Scuffed. Split at the seams. Faded red leather, stained with the sweat of men who hit hard but rarely hit right. Arnold walked toward it. No announcement. No fanfare. His boots struck the floor like steady war drums, slow, spaced, grounded. The silence around him stretched. It didn't fall quiet, it tightened. Ryan followed a few steps behind, still trying to hold the leash on a moment he no longer controlled. "Let's see it then," he said, tone sharp but thinner now. "Show us what the golden era's got left." No one laughed. Arnold reached the bag. He adjusted the wrist of his hoodie, revealing a forearm lined not with veins, but with history. He stepped back, planted both feet. No bounce. No stance from a poster. Just balance. Breath. His hands rose. And he struck. The first jab cracked through the gym like a starting pistol. Clean. No overextension. No sound from him, only from the bag, snapping back like it remembered him. Then a cross. Then a hook. Then another. Each strike landed with surgical cruelty. Not flashy. Not wild. Just right. Like choreography from an old reel buried in celluloid. Like instinct aged in iron. Ryan folded his arms across his chest, but the smirk never returned. The crowd leaned in now, not for a show, but for answers. Even the music overhead faded into irrelevance. Phones came out, but slowly, like the moment deserved permission. Arnold pivoted into an elbow, tight, short, violent. The bag jolted. The chain above groaned, bolts twitching in the ceiling. Then came a knee, driven in hard. The leather split a little more. Dust puffed out. No one breathed. He stepped back, reset. His eyes didn't scan the crowd. He wasn't playing to them. He wasn't aware of them. Not really. He was somewhere else. Someone else. Then came the final move. A roundhouse, tight arc, fast chamber, impact like thunder. His boot slammed into the side of the bag with such force that the entire structure jerked sideways. The chain tore slightly from the anchor. The bag swung high, diagonal, pendulum off axis, before crashing back down into stillness. Not a single person moved. Someone's water bottle tipped over in the quiet. A dumbbell rolled half an inch on the floor. No one picked it up. From the other side of the gym, Marcus whispered, not loud, not certain, but with something close to reverence. He's fought before. No one corrected him. Because they all knew. Arnold exhaled through his nose. A deep, controlled breath. Then he turned, walking away from the bag like it hadn't just trembled under his hands. He didn't look at Ryan. He didn't need to. The bag was still swinging. And the room hadn't found its breath yet. Ryan was already moving before the bag stopped swaying. He needed sound. Movement. Control. He snatched a pair of dumbbells, heavier than necessary, heavier than wise. His arms flared as he walked toward the center floor, flashing tension in his forearms and strain in his shoulders. He didn't need to lift. He needed to matter again. He stopped near the benches, tossed one of the dumbbells lightly in the air, caught it with a grin that barely reached his eyes. Let me show you how we do it now, he said loud enough for the whole gym to hear. Not slow. Not silent. Real training. He began his curls, jerky, exaggerated. Bouncing at the knees. Breathing too loud. Reps sloppy with ego. Each lift more about momentum than muscle. There were a few soft chuckles. Nervous ones. He locked eyes with Arnold. You like that, old man? Want me to show you again in slow motion? Arnold didn't blink. He stepped forward. No words. He reached down and picked up the same pair of dumbbells he had used earlier, no heavier, no lighter. The crowd shifted, circling quietly, pretending to stretch, drink water, tie shoes. But no one moved far. Arnold turned his back again, just like before. And he curled. Controlled. Symmetrical. Still. His spine didn't move. His wrists never wavered. There was no facial strain, no breathy struggle. Just breath. Just form. Just legacy in motion. On the fourth rep, he paused, holding the dumbbells at the top, elbows locked. Then slowly lowered them. And again. And again. The contrast was unbearable. Ryan tried to joke. Guess he's practicing for a wax statue. No one laughed. Marcus didn't blink. He wasn't watching Arnold anymore, he was studying. The way the feet stayed planted. The shoulders didn't roll. The core stayed tight. It wasn't for show. It was for something else. Arnold finished his final rep, turned, and placed the dumbbells back into the rack with the same quiet care as before. Then he looked at Ryan. Eyes calm. Jaw loose. Nothing aggressive. But something final. Anyone can lift weight, he said, voice steady. Few know how to carry it. It landed like a barbell dropped from the sky. Ryan tried to respond, but the words caught in his throat. He looked at his own dumbbells, then back at Arnold, as if the tools he had used suddenly felt plastic. Marcus whispered to himself, barely audible. He's not training a body. He's training a principle. Arnold didn't hear it. He was already walking away, rolling his shoulders slightly, checking old joints like an engine checking itself before a long road. And still, not one word from him had been raised. But the volume in the room had never been louder. In silence. The battle ropes lay coiled like sleeping serpents at the far end of the gym. No one touched them. Not without intention. Not without something to prove. Ryan wiped his forehead with a towel that didn't need to be used. He swung it over his shoulder like a banner. His voice found volume again. Let's keep it moving, he said, louder than necessary. You've done curls, done your punches. Let's see if there's any fire left in those arms. He walked toward the ropes, yanked one up roughly, and let it slam against the mat with a loud crack. Again. And again. Come on! He barked, each word a whip. Not your posing stage anymore, Grandpa! But the room didn't cheer. They weren't watching him. Arnold approached the second set of ropes. No flinch. No rush. He stood before them like he'd arrived at a familiar threshold. He didn't flex. Didn't bounce. He just stood, arms loose, eyes down. Then he bent. Picked up the ropes. No grunt. No swing. Just lift. And he began. The first waves were quiet. Controlled. From the core, through the shoulders, down the arms. Even. Consistent. No jerking. No strain. Then, he increased the tempo. Gradually. Like a storm learning its shape. The ropes slammed in rhythm, tight, symmetrical, relentless. Not wild. Not flashy. Just exact. The floor beneath him didn't squeak. It absorbed. Accepted. Ryan flailed harder, slamming his ropes like they owed him something. His form unraveled. His shoulders hunched. The rhythm broke. Arnold didn't look over. His face stayed calm. Breathing measured. Ropes moving like twin rivers pounding against stone. The crowd leaned closer. Phones hovered, recording, but not posting. Not yet. It didn't feel like a highlight. It felt like something sacred. Marcus watched from the front. Jaw tight. Breath synced. He wasn't holding his phone. He wasn't blinking. Arnold shifted. From waves to slams. 1, 2, 3. Each hit the floor like a cannon blast. His feet planted deeper. His back straight. He wasn't battling the ropes. He was outlasting them. A slam echoed off the wall. Someone gasped. Another slam. The ropes snapped downward like the earth owed them space. Then the last. One final strike. And the ropes collapsed. Not dropped. Collapsed. Like soldiers who had given everything. Arnold stood still. Breath rising from his chest like steam from a tempered forge. He didn't throw the ropes. He didn't roar. He lowered them softly to the mat. Respectfully. Ryan opened his mouth. Nothing came out. From somewhere behind a cable machine, a woman whispered. You don't fake that. That's built. People nodded. Not in agreement, but in understanding. Arnold wiped his palms on his hoodie and walked past Ryan without a glance. The ropes didn't move. But something in the room had shifted again. And this time, it wasn't swinging back. The deadlift platform sat in the far corner of the gym, cast an uneven light from a flickering overhead bulb. The rubber flooring was cracked at the edges. The plates on the bar were already loaded, silent, waiting. Arnold walked toward it. The crowd followed, but not too close. They didn't huddle. They observed, like parishioners unsure if they were about to witness a service or a reckoning. Ryan leaned against a nearby machine. His arms were crossed again, but his chest didn't rise quite as high. His smirk had faded somewhere between the second slam and the final rope drop. Still, his voice found its way out. That's a big lift, old man, he said, trying to lay sarcasm into his words. Hope your spine signed a waiver. No one laughed. Arnold didn't respond. He stepped onto the platform. No music. No chalk. No noise. Just the whisper of boots against worn rubber and the soft creak of the bar when he gripped it. He didn't warm up. He didn't test the bar. He bent at the knees, back straight, head level. And he pulled. The bar rose slow, steady, like time surrendering to purpose. The steel bent, but not him. The plates trembled in unison. His breath stayed calm. His jaw stayed loose. His eyes didn't close. He held it. 1 second. 2. Then lowered it back down, controlled, deliberate. Thud. Not a crash. A statement. No one moved. No one even coughed. He stepped off the platform and stood still for a moment, letting the silence settle like dust. Ryan cleared his throat, too loud. "Nice rep," he said, voice brittle. "But is that it?" Arnold didn't answer. He walked to the weight tree beside the rack. Added more. A thick 25 on each side. The bar now sagged in the middle, just slightly, like it understood what was coming. Ryan watched from the sidelines, arms crossed but fingers twitching. Arnold returned. Took position. Again. Same stance. Same breath. Same silence. And he pulled. Slower this time. The bend in the bar more dramatic. The strain visible, not in him, but in the steel. His spine held. His legs stayed rooted. His arms were still ropes drawn from stone. He held it again. Then lowered it, like he was returning something borrowed, not spent. This time, someone gasped. Marcus didn't blink. He mouthed one word. "How?" Arnold turned to the crowd, not to perform, not to bask. Just to speak. "Real strength doesn't echo," he said softly. "It endures." And with that, he stepped down. The bar remained. Bent. But still whole. Like the man who lifted it. The bar didn't rest. It trembled, like it remembered being defied. Arnold stood beside it, eyes steady. Sweat darkened his hoodie at the shoulders, but he made no move to wipe it. The platform beneath him was littered with chalk dust from lifters who needed help holding on. He never used chalk. He didn't need grip. He had memory. Ryan stepped forward, trying to reclaim posture, command. But the words felt slippery now. He motioned to the weight. "Let's end it here," he said. "Real strength. No tricks. No legacy. Just pull or fail." But it wasn't a challenge anymore. It was a plea. Arnold didn't flinch. He added another plate to each side. The bar curved visibly now, less like a tool, more like a test. Someone in the crowd murmured, "That's not a deadlift anymore. That's a message." Marcus stood closest, hands gripping the edge of a bench like it could anchor him. His eyes wide, locked. His breathing synced to Arnold's. Arnold stepped to the bar. Bent. And pulled. The weight rose slowly, bending not just the bar, but the air around it. His legs didn't shake. His spine didn't buckle. Every inch was earned, like climbing a ladder rung by rung in a burning building. His breath hitched once, but only once. Then he stood tall. Bar at full height. And held. 2 seconds. 3. Silence pressed in. Then he lowered it. Controlled. Reverent. The platform absorbed the impact like a church floor taking communion. Ryan didn't speak. He couldn't. Arnold turned. Not smug. Not smiling. Just present. He looked at Ryan, eye to eye, and said calmly, "You wanted strength. Now let's see yours." The bar still hummed, metal warped from use, from memory. Not a sound in the gym. Only the faint whir of the AC, the distant hum of a forgotten playlist. Ryan stared at the bar. Didn't move. Didn't step forward. Someone behind him shifted uncomfortably. Another cleared their throat. No one said his name. No one called for a turn. Because no one expected him to lift. Not anymore. Marcus took a slow step closer, not toward the bar, but toward Arnold. Not to speak. Not to congratulate. Just to understand. Ryan tried to laugh. It cracked halfway through. He looked at his own reflection in the mirror across the gym, tighter now. Smaller somehow. Arnold didn't break eye contact. His voice came once more, flat, firm. "You wanted a show. I came to train." Ryan looked down. And didn't look up again. Arnold walked away. Not fast. Not slow. Just with gravity. The kind that doesn't announce itself. The kind that doesn't need to. Arnold didn't head to the locker room. He didn't sit down. Didn't stretch. Didn't drink water. He walked. Straight across the gym, past the dumbbells, past the rope station, past the heavy bag that still hung slightly off-center from earlier. His boots thudded softly on the rubber flooring. Every step steady, unshaken. A man who wasn't leaving a place, but finishing something sacred. Ryan stood off to the side, shoulders dropped, arms loose, no words left to summon. He didn't try to stop him. Didn't dare. At the front desk, Arnold unzipped his gym bag and pulled out something folded, worn, faded, almost forgotten. A different hoodie. Older than the one he wore now. Frayed cuffs. A faded logo at the chest, barely legible anymore. One sleeve torn at the seam. Its gray had dulled to dust. He placed it on the countertop with care. The gym manager, mid-30s, unsure if he should speak, raised his eyebrows slightly. Arnold met his eyes. "Hang it up," he said. "Not to worship. Just to remember." Then he turned. And walked out. The doors didn't slam. The wind didn't rise. There was no slow clap. No applause. Just the hush of a room unsure how to move again. Marcus stood near the ropes, still frozen, still holding onto a water bottle he hadn't touched in 20 minutes. His eyes flicked toward the front, where the hoodie rested. Then to the platform. Still loaded. Still bowed. Still unchallenged. Later that evening, the hoodie was pinned gently above the squat rack. No plaque. No spotlight. No name. Just fabric. And weight. Underneath it, someone wrote in thick black marker on the whiteboard. "We honor the ones who built the floor we train on." The next morning, the gym was quieter. Phones stayed in pockets. Mirrors went unglanced. The dumbbells were lifted with cleaner form. The ropes were moved with less rage, more rhythm. Something had shifted, not just in the air, but in the people. Ryan came in early. He didn't say much. Just wiped down equipment. Reset the battle ropes. He passed the whiteboard once, paused, and gave the hoodie a small nod. The kind of nod men give when words no longer matter. And Marcus? He stayed later. He did his sets in silence. No music. No TikToks. No grunting. Just form. Just breath. Just the echo of something he couldn't explain, but would never forget. Someone near the treadmills asked, "Was that really him?" No one answered. They didn't need to. Because Arnold hadn't come to prove he was still strong. He came to show them what real strength looks like. When it doesn't need to announce itself. And when he walked out, he didn't leave behind a name. He left behind a standard. If you enjoyed this story, let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories.